Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, What Next for Clean Air Zones? I'll be your host today. My name is Nick Ruxton-Boyle, and I'm Director of Environment for Marston Holdings. Marston Holdings is one of the largest transport and enforcement companies in the UK, and we provide a wide range of services and products for local authority clean air projects and programs both in the UK and the EU. I was hoping to start this webinar with a record-breaking announcement, but I don't think we've quite got there. But we're very close to the Landor record, so thank you all for joining us today. We have a huge number of registered attendees on this session and a really good blend of guests from academics, those in the air quality industry, charity representatives, lobby groups, central government and local authority. So this isn't the first Landor event I have hosted, albeit it's the first online, so this is a new experience for me. I'm quite used to speaking to a room full of delegates in a conference hall, and as colleagues in Landor will know, I normally start my sessions with a slide of my son doing something in and around air quality or transport. I don't have any slides for you today. You'll be pleased to hear I've left that to our panel of experts, but I do have a little story about what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. As you probably know, it was Clean Air Day 2 weeks ago, and every year I go down to my son's nursery and do a short presentation to the kids on an environmental topic, on an air quality topic. And last year I did the school run, so I didn't know what to do this year. So I did a bit of research, and there's not a huge amount of educational content online for younger kids. So if there are any budding journalists or authors out there, there is a gap in the market for young children's educational content. But I did eventually find something on turning the lights off. So I did a 30-minute session with a group of 35 under fives on turning the lights off, and lo and behold, for the rest of the day they went round the nursery and turned every light off, and this is fabulous. I think I've created a good set of eco-conscious children down at the local nursery. So I was very pleased with that. And finally, just a quick thank you both to Landor for hosting this event and to our three expert speakers, which I will introduce shortly. So a couple of bits of admin to start with. So we have three presenters today, three speakers, and each will be speaking for about 10 minutes. So firstly, we've got Sam Harrison from JAQU, and he will be giving us the national picture from the Joint Air Quality Unit, which most of you will know is a combination of the DFT and DEFRA. Second up, we've got Nigel Jenkins. Nigel is an air quality scientist who I've been working with over the last 18 months, and he'll be running through some of the science and some other solutions to local authorities' air quality problems. And finally, we have Ole Lykke Christiansen. He is one of our clients who is responsible for operation of the Danish low emission zones. So we're looking forward to hearing about his experiences of launching 5 low emission zones during the COVID crisis. The three presentations will follow each other, and after each one I will have a quick chat with the presenter, and then we will have a 30-minute question and answer session at the end with the whole panel. So what I would ask you all to do is, if you haven't done already, please have a look at your dashboard at the side, and there's a question box within that dashboard. So please pop your questions in there, and we will get through as many as we can in the 30 minutes today. And those that we don't get through, we will ask our experts to answer, and we will host and post the answers after the session. And for those of you who tweet, we're using the hashtag Clean Air Zones today, so please do use that in your socials throughout the morning. Right, so a little bit of scene setting. I suppose this is a timely event, if you will, pure by luck more than anything. We originally planned to host this event back in March, but as you know, we are all living in a pandemic, and the COVID emergency has seen a huge range of challenges that we've faced, both for our day-to-day life and our travel. We've been watching the graphs go up and down for traffic, for travel, for road use, rail use, bus use. We've seen lots of reports on pollutants going down mostly. However, the latest is that people like Nigel starting to look at ozone levels, and that's going up. So there's really interesting dynamic going on at the moment with air quality. So a really timely event today. I mentioned Clean Air Day recently, a couple of weeks ago. We saw a lot of local authority activity and pledges from across the industry, which was great. And in the press, you'll have no doubt seen some of the Clean Air Zone phase 1 cities and areas that are ready to go live have made some announcements. So we've seen Bath and Birmingham Clean Air Zones both announced their go live dates for early 2021 and mid 2021. And as you'll have seen, Leeds City Council have announced that theirs is no longer required, and this is down to early vehicle upgrades rather than traffic reduction, which is really interesting position to take, and I look forward to seeing some of the data behind that. And Transport Greater Manchester, one of the largest CAZs in the UK, are out to consultation. This is a zone that covers the entirety of Greater Manchester, 10 local authorities, so that is now out to consultation. If you haven't had a look at that, really interesting CAZ as to how that is set up and how it will operate. And finally, north of the border, we have seen Transport Scotland, who are running the low emission zone programme, essentially under a pause and review position as to see how COVID is affecting north of the border. So looking forward, and we are still in our pandemic, we don't know how COVID will affect the long-term behaviour of some of our travel habits. We've got local lockdowns. Even announced this morning, I think, one of the areas which are planning a CAZ have gone into a local lockdown. So for a transport planner like myself, who relies on data and robust data and predictable data and trends, it's really difficult to try and work out what the behaviour change will be in terms of traffic levels, in terms of fleet upgrades, in terms of the air quality. So an interesting time really at the moment. We've got local authority and governments that have had to reprioritise their investment programmes and essentially address the pandemic, with the furlough scheme with central government, with local authorities reassigning funds to COVID emergency projects. You know, how will that impact on the green agenda and the green recovery, as it's been elegantly called, is something that fills me with hope as to what councils will do and will want to do, and the appetite for air quality projects when we come out of the pandemic. And behind all this, we've got our local authority and government climate targets. Many of the authorities on today's webinar, I have no doubt, will have declared their own climate emergencies, some for as early as 2028, pardon me. So really interesting, as obviously air quality projects and programs and solutions do help with the decarbonisation program that we are currently grappling with, and as such. And then we've got the Environment Bill, which is still in Parliament. I think it's 300 plus days now that's been sat in Parliament, and that itself sets the framework for new particulate matters, particulate 2.5 in particular. So again, these air quality solutions that are designed for NOx also have some impact on our particulate matter. And to finish on Brexit. Brexit is still a big unknown. We are very close to the end of the transition period, and we are ready to exit the European Union. And what impact will that have on some of our legislative set of solutions that we have to deliver? Right, that's it for me. Thank you all for joining us today. I would like now to hand over to our first presenter. We've got a presentation from Sam Harrison. He is the Head of Communications and Stakeholder Engagement at JAQU, the Joint Air Quality Unit. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Nick, and what a great introduction. I barely need to say anything now. It's you've covered off most of my issues, but I will endeavour to try and put some meat onto those bones. So welcome everybody, and thank you very much, and thank you to Marston Holdings for inviting us to participate in this seminar, which what I'm going to do today is perhaps go over some old ground, but I think it's always important to know the context that we're working within, and to give a very brief overview of some of the NO2 reduction plans and some of the other work that we're doing. I think just also talk a little bit more about the COVID and the impact that's had on air pollution, and finally just go on to a progress update, and again sort of state where we are with some of the local authorities who've declared and some of the things which are going on there. And then obviously we will have a quick word with Nick, and I will be waiting for the panel at the end, so I'll be able to sort of listen to questions at that point. So if you could have the next slide, please. So just set out the context of the work on clean air zones. I mean, it's recognised that air pollution is a huge public risk. It's certainly the biggest environmental health risk to people, and can have detrimental effects to people with lung, respiratory illnesses, circulatory illnesses. And I think it's really important when we're talking about clean air zones to recognise that vulnerable groups are probably the most affected, and that's an interesting point on the basis that one of the criticisms of clean air zones is that the socially deprived will be impacted, and they are of course impacted on the economic, and whether they're going to have the right sort of vehicles or whether they've got the capability to upgrade, etc. Nevertheless, they are also the people most likely to be affected by air pollution. So you'll have heard a lot from the government in the last 12 months, in fact, on air quality. The Clean Air Strategy came back way back actually in January 2019, which has translated, at least in part, to the Environment Bill that will be coming out, I think fairly soon. It's obviously COVID has made impacts on the parliamentary timetable, but the government is very enthusiastic about getting this Environment Bill out there and starting to go through the readings. And then of course there's the what was Road to Zero, and I should have changed on here, but it's really moved on to the decarbonisation agenda as a whole. The Department of Transport has been making a lot of announcements and has been moving forward with trying to get to a sort of net zero position in the next sort of 10 to 20 years. So that's sort of political context that we sit in. Now, as you know, JAQU's work is very much about dealing with the NO2 problem. You'll all be aware, but the government's been taken to court on a number of occasions because the NO2 concentrations at roadside exceed the legal limit of 40.49 micrograms per cubic metre. And we found with originally 61 local authorities eventually got to the point where those ones which needed to create clean air plans, and at the end I'll just quickly run through where we are with that. But in the majority of cases there is no need for a charging. In fact, the charging clean air zone is really when nothing else will work in the shortest possible time, and that's very clear. The shortest possible time is what the High Court said needed to happen, and so that is why we're around as the Joint Air Quality Unit, as Nick pointed out, a joint unit with DFT and DEFRA, and both ministers do take both sets of ministers do take decisions. It is not one or the other. There needs to be a dual approval on both sides. Just so those of you who aren't aware as well, we have 3 directors at DEFRA and DFT who are responsible for the programme: Richard Bruce and Caroline Lowe on the DFT side, and Susanna May on the DEFRA side. Can you get the next slide, please? So I always have to say this line. It sometimes raises irritation with people, I accept, but this is the government position, which is that the NO2 issue is local, and it is localised. It is within certain areas, and therefore it needs to be targeted at those areas rather than a broad brush approach. And what we did was to set out the challenge to local authorities to monitor their data and to come up with solutions that would sort of bring down the NO2 within legal limits, and that's all they have to do from our perspective. So it's other government policies which will bring down air pollution overall, but from our perspective, it's NO2 that we're entirely focused on. So Treasury has gradually over the years increased the amount of money. I think when I first started, it was in £400 or £500 million. We've now got up to £880 million. To be available, and that's for two funds, the Implementation Fund and the Clean Air Fund. The Implementation Fund is very much about the what actions need to be taken directly, and the Clean Air Fund is about mitigating the impact of those actions upon businesses, the economy, and the local people within the areas that are affected. This all comes under the Clean Air Zone framework, which is readily available. I can provide a link if people haven't got it, and that sets out what the standards are. As I'm sure you know, the vehicles which are the cleanest, if you're going to a charging clean air zone, are Euro 6 and Euro 4 or electric, if that is the case, or hydrogen indeed as well as another area of interest. And as part of that framework, we set out 4 classes of clean air zone, which are on. I won't go through them because they're in front of you. And basically, all local authorities try to go to the minimum which will achieve compliance with the legal requirements. Now, obviously, as Nick says, we know the first one now is going to be in Bath, which will be a Class C, covering buses, coaches, taxis, HGVs and vans and minibuses, and that's going to be launched on the 15th of March in 2021, and then the following zone will be the Birmingham zone, which is quite a small one, but it is a Class D, so it will include private motor cars as well, and that will come into force on the 1st of June. Obviously, there has been a delay due to COVID, and I think it was right, and ministers felt it was right, but there should be a delay because of the dealing with the pandemic was clearly the priority. However, as the Transport Secretary said a couple of weeks ago on television, this is not a reason COVID is not a reason not to start moving forward with these zones. Hence, the acceleration that you've seen recently in delivering the Clean Air Zone plans and moving forward with that. And just so we're clear on what central government is providing aside from the money, we're also providing the online vehicle checker, which has improved all the time because we're getting more and more data on it. So the false positives you might have heard about, where you have early adopter vehicles that had a Euro 6 engine, for instance, that was installed prior to 2018 when records truly began on what Euro 6 classings are. That was provided, that's improved over time. And also we're developing a charging payment portal with business accounts as part of that. Could we just go to the next slide, please? Thanks. I'm mindful that I've probably just spent a lot more time than I'm supposed to on this, but I'll try and get through this, but give you sort of information. So just is out of interest, the impact of COVID restrictions on air quality. So we have seen that NO2 has actually consistently moved with road traffic levels. So where we saw low road traffic at the beginning of the pandemic, the NO2 dropped. As cars and vehicles have come more back onto the road, we're seeing those reductions slip away a little bit and an increase in numbers. Particulate matter hasn't really changed. Ozone's actually gone up. So there's some quite interesting results of this, and shows that there is still a challenge. COVID, lack of vehicles has not meant that the air pollution has improved across the board. So I think that's certainly something worth bearing in mind. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I can't really go into the graph and explain what that means, but that's basically where we got to on that. So we do the next slide, please. So in terms of the implications for 2020 and moving forward, one of the things that have been problematic, weather. It's staggering how much different weather forms can impact NO2, and it has been an extreme weather year, which has made things interesting in terms of monitoring. I think one of the disappointments, although Leeds don't seem to have suffered from it quite as badly, is the slowing of the fleet turnover. So we expect vehicles, I mean HGVs for instance, tend to change every 6 to 7 years in most fleets, and obviously we'll be getting more and more compliant vehicles coming in over time. And also, of course, with the way the business and the economy is working, it is also having an impact. So we're perhaps getting more white vans out on the road, but equally, some businesses are not able to operate in the way that they were previously operating. So you're seeing different vehicles. I think it's quite difficult for 2020 to really plan out exactly how this is going to work. I think the Leeds point is quite an interesting one. I'll return to in a minute because Nick did bring it up. But we are working with local authorities to understand the implications, and there have been a couple of local authorities where we have done a serious review just to make sure that if they're doing a charging clean air zone, for instance, that it is the appropriate measure. And as a result of that work, as you've seen, Leeds are no longer going to require a clean air zone. However, we are going to monitor their situation, and obviously if there's a return to the levels before, then we may need to have a different conversation with them. I think the other thing just also worth bearing is DFTs are working very hard on the transport green recovery, and pumping a lot of money into making sure that coming back, so it's effectively coming back greener, encouraging walking and cycling. I mean, the big flying element, of course, is public transport, which is tricky at the moment simply because people aren't travelling on public transport as much because of COVID for lots of different reasons, and public transport is important to making sure that the emissions stay lower. Could you do the next slide, please? Thank you. So I think just in terms of where we are now, there's a number of clean air zones and potentially charging clean air zones on the list here. Baines being Bath and North East Somerset, but the actual city is Bath, and Birmingham they'll be going first. Leeds obviously needs to drop down to the next level, which I neglected to do on this spreadsheet, so I apologise for that. Sheffield is investigating their charging clean air zone. Rotherham isn't actually in that, but they are partnered up to produce a plan. Gateshead and Newcastle, Manchester, Bradford, Liverpool, Bristol and Portsmouth are all looking at charging. Basildon's a slightly different case that we're just working through at the moment. And then you'll recall, of course, Nottingham, which originally I think I was asked to come here to talk about the workplace levies, which obviously Nottingham put in place, but also there's a number of other local authorities that are using other measures. And then we have the slightly later joining teams from Bolsover, Broxburn. So this came out of a supplement to the NO2 plan where we're noting more exceedances across the country. And some plans are lucky enough to be complete: Gloucestershire, Wolverhampton, Sandwell and Blackwater Valley. So I think that that's a very quick run through, I have to admit. It probably wasn't very quick, I probably overran the time, but I don't know, Nick, are you sort of happy to discuss now?
Yes, thanks, Sam. That was a great run through of where you are in JAQU. We are overrunning slightly, so I've just got one question really. The funding, the 880 million, is there any of that is currently available for local authorities to bid for? I'm mindful we've got a number on the webinar today who may be thinking about clean air solutions for their local areas.
So the 880 million is ring fenced specifically for the local authorities that have to put in a nitrogen dioxide local plan. However, that is not the only funding that is available to local authorities. So quite aside from issues like or funds like the Transforming Cities Fund, for instance, there's been a number of bus funds to improve either using retrofit or indeed, I think the zero emissions funding, which has come through the Department for Transport. And I think we are going to see a lot more of those sorts of funds coming in as time moves on. I mean, we're in a tricky position to necessarily talk about it, but there are things like charging schemes for electric charging as opposed to cash charging. There's a lot of funding available for that, and there's also the funding which is available to sort of help with infrastructure. All of these funds I could probably find for you in 5 minutes. I can't think of the names of them off the top of my head, which is rather unfortunate. But again, I'm quite happy to provide some form of briefing, which can either be sent out as part of the pack after the seminar, if that would be helpful.
That sounds fabulous. Thank you very much for that, Sam. Right, then we'll move swiftly on to our next presenter. So next up, we've got Nigel Jenkins. Nigel is a principal air quality consultant at Phlorum, and we've been working together for the last 18 months on a number of business cases for clean air zones. So Nigel, over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me along. Just to give you a bit of background, I've worked in local authorities and private consultancies. So I've worked across both sides of the fence, you might say, with working on clean air zones and local air quality management. So what I really wanted to do today was just almost refresh some of the things that are going on with local authorities, and sort of demonstrating some of the strategies to improve air quality that are now moving forward. So if I could move to the next slide. Thanks a lot. Well, Sam has stolen the majority of my thunder to do with clean air zones and the NO2 plan, but I think what I wanted to start with really is to set the scene. And obviously, a lot of local authorities have been identified where there are exceedances of the limit value that were in the NO2 plan, and a number of authorities were identified in the 3 different tranches, I call them. So we had the first tranche of local authorities. They're the 5 CAZ cities that were initially identified, plus London, for the first phase to take forward clean air zones and assess the viability of those. And those were driven really from the limit value, the exceedances of the limit value for NO2. Following that, there were additional authorities were identified. So we had the tranche 2 and 3 authorities coming through, and they were identified and were assisted by JAQU to assess the impacts of potential impacts of introducing and reducing emissions at a local level, and to ensure they can deliver compliance in the shortest practical time. So you can see there's a map of a rough map of the locations. I must say it's not overly accurate, but it gives you an idea of the locations where the assessments were required in the first in the NO2 plan. And although there were significant funding put into the local authorities, there are still a number of authorities who have air quality management areas that weren't within the in the plans. And so, as you can see on the right-hand side, we have around about 250 authorities to date who have AQMAs, or air quality management areas, and we have over 650 air quality managements in about 250 different authorities. So you can see that although the NO2 plans targeted a number of locations, not every single location was picked up. So this is where local authorities are working on developing air quality action plans in addition to any other plans that they might have under the NO2 plan. So you can see there's a focus in different locations for different pollutants, and you can see that the AQMAs are predominantly declared because of nitrogen dioxide, and those are mainly from transport sources. But also there are a number which have been declared for PM10, and there's a declining number now actually that were declared for SO2. So we have other pollutants that need to be targeted as well. And although the authorities that are working with JAQU at the moment are actually focusing on NO2, there are generally co-benefits for reducing emissions for particulates as well in those locations. So moving forward, really, if I could move to the next slide. So just to give you a flavour of some of the practical strategies that are sort of moving forward for local authorities that were not identified in the NO2 plan. I've got some examples of different strategies that different authorities have been working on. And of course, a clean air zone isn't exclusive to any of those identified authorities. You can actually introduce a clean air zone. And JAQU introduced a clean air zone. They actually coined the phrase clean air zone first up. I hate to say that JAQU didn't get that first, but JAQU introduced a clean air zone for zero emission park and rides, and they have a bus clean air zone that's now in operation. Other types of clean air zones are known as low emission zones, or in the case of Oxford, they targeted a zero emission zone. And unfortunately, it's on hold at the moment for the reasons that we know about. And these type of low emission zones have actually been in operation before clean air zones came about. So there have been low emission zones, for example, down here where I am in Brighton, there's a bus low emission zone which limits the access for different classes of Eurobus, Euro classes for different buses. And they're also introducing and looking at hybrid buses, which are now in operation down in Brighton, and also they're looking to develop hydrogen infrastructure at the depots, and looking and working on a European project at the moment about introducing buses that are going to be hydrogen fueled. Some other things that a lot of local authorities look at and have introduced is taxi licensing, and this is quite an effective way of actually getting taxis to move towards low emission types or even electric vehicles. And a number of local authorities, say for example in Nottingham, who were identified as one of the clean air zones, they moved forward on a package of different types of interventions, and one of those included working with the local taxi fleet, installing charging points and taxi ranks, funding home charges, and also supporting and expanding the council's try before you buy scheme. So they've moved ahead quite well in Nottingham, but there's a number of other authorities who have put in air quality grants, for example, for schemes across the UK to develop these sort of interventions. I'm going to skip through and move fairly quickly because I know we need to sort of keep on track. So if I could have the next slide, please. There we go. Other practical strategies that a number of authorities are looking at is traffic management. They look at maybe ways of access constraints, road widths, having one-way systems to improve air quality, putting in bridgeway constraints, so they can stop certain types of vehicles accessing certain areas, and these can be done through traffic orders. Congestion charging is also something that's coming up, and it's something that can be considered, and it can manage and reduce emissions. And the thing that we have to remember here is that we're also targeting pollutants and carbon. So we want to see a reduction in CO2 as well as the noxious pollutants. Moving forward, some authorities, for example, in London, are actually introducing low traffic neighbourhoods. Now these are being implemented in localized locations in suburban areas, and they're linking these through to school streets. So we're seeing a number of these sort of building out from the school street situation. My time is up. And also there is restrictions. So how they're introducing these is putting in width restrictions, bollards, planters, bus gates, parklets, and 20-plenty zones. And also introducing on-street EV parking. So they're trying to encourage safer streets, making them more open and accessible for cycling and walking, reducing modified flows and modal shift. So a number of the London boroughs that are currently trialling these include Kingston and Sutton. And there's a couple of examples of the plans that they have and the areas that they've got to the right-hand side. Moving forward, a number of authorities, including the Sussex authorities, Kent and North Warwickshire, have introduced things called low emission planning guidances. So these are guidances which actually help with introducing low emissions initiatives into development. And this is something that we've done quite a lot of work on with a number of authorities, developing the strategies and being on the other side actually with developers, actually sort of getting them to understand the needs of the low emission strategies within the authorities. Moving forward and linked to this, there are also some authorities which have diesel parking policies, and as above with the low emission planning guidance, they have minimum standards for EV parking in developments. And in an example of this is West Sussex, who have introduced a parking policy which actually graduates the requirement for the number or percentage of parking spaces that should be EV, and they're increasing those as we go towards 2030, 2040 targets. Other ones include examples that are on the ground at the moment is the Euro emission sort of diesel differential parking fees that have been introduced. City of London, Ringo uses records to identify the vehicle, and the parking fees are assigned to the Euro standard or the type of vehicle that's in use. And Islington have had an EV charging for their own sort of council parking and sort of local parking in place, and they've had that going for a number of years, and they have differential rates for diesel and electric, of course. If we move forward to the next one, the final one here, something that Nick is very fond of, and we're very keen to promote. Workplace parking levy has been a very successful initiative for Nottingham, and they've actually been able to raise up to £61 million through the workplace parking level. And this you could say is a type of congestion charging sort of emissions reduction type of initiative that has been brought forward, and they've got fees for parking for businesses, and what that has done is that enabled Nottingham to invest in some of their amazing public transport and modal shift initiatives that are on the ground, and that has actually enabled them to not have to introduce a charging clean air zone, because they've got a number of different initiatives that have been in play for a number of years, so they've been able to move forward on these and improve air quality. So that's it from me. I hope that was a interesting sort of skip through some of the things and some of the strategies that local authorities are moving forward on.
That's great, thanks Nigel, and we're still good for time, so don't worry about your alarm going off there. That was great. A couple of questions from me, and my questions, we've had almost exactly the same question come up from some of our delegates, which is great. What, in your view, obviously you went through a lot of different solutions there that local authorities can and are implementing. Is there one that you view as being the sort of best value for money with in this day and age, we're all mindful of costs of things, and I'm thinking along the lines of low traffic neighbourhoods. They, to me, seem to be a quite low cost tool with high rewards, as it were. And I suppose the follow-on question is, what are the air quality implications of these in terms of diverted traffic? Have you got a feel for that yet with the few schemes that are in?
Yeah, I think it's all dependent on what the main source of pollutant is, and so the source apportionment is very important when you're looking at this. So in a number of cases, the bus fleets are a key one to target, and I think a lot of the low emission zones that have gone on before and continue to happen is about targeting the older buses and then sort of taking them out. So with the green bus funds and things like that, there's been access to funds to actually get retrofits going. And also, if you're going to implement a low emission zone for buses, it is easier to get through the system to actually put in traffic orders, or to actually implement them a lot quicker and have zones where these would work well. Low traffic neighbourhoods is a great way forward, and it'll be interesting. We're looking at helping some authorities about assessing what the impacts are, and that's something we're going through at the moment. But it tends to be that it's a very good thing for encouraging modal shift. So it's very difficult to know if those have implications on key areas where we have high pollution incidences, which tend to be in narrow street canyons. So those local traffic neighborhoods would have a benefit in general, a far better benefit in general about air quality than targeted measures in some cases.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Nigel. I look forward to those studies then on the impact of low traffic neighbourhoods, as I see those as a key part of our green recovery as it is. Right, thanks for that, Nigel. Now we'll move on to our third and final presentation of the day. Next up, we've got Ole Lykke Christiansen, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Sund & Bælt. Sund & Bælt are the organisation that are looking after and managing the Danish low emission zone. So over to you, Ole.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for letting me presenting today. I'll tell you about. I have responsible for tolling in Sund & Bælt, and we have just implemented a digital low emission zone scheme that I'll tell you about today. First, here at the first slide, you can see our core team at the night of going live, and two different cameras in Copenhagen, both at one at the installed mast and one installed at the existing infrastructure. Next slide, please. First, a little bit about Sund & Bælt. We are a state-owned infrastructure provider owned by the Ministry of Transport. And we have built and operate the Storebælt Bridge and the Øresund Bridge to Sweden, and right now we have starting building the tunnel to Germany. We also operate a free flow tolling system at Frederikssund, and we have barrier tolling system both at Storebælt at Øresund. You also see the signs for low emission zones in Denmark, where you can see that it is in 4 cities divided into 4 municipalities. Next slide, please. Just short about what has been implemented before or until 1st of July. It has been trucks only. It has required a physical vignette in the front screen of the trucks, and all the enforcement has been done by the police. You see the vignette and the sign for the zones here. 1.5 years ago, there was a discussion by the government that they wanted to sharpen the requirements, and luckily we succeeded to convince the government that we should do this digital and do the enforcement using ANPR cameras, and we actually also succeeded to be part of the working group together with the scheme owner, the Ministry of Environment, where we've for the last 1.5 years has worked closely together to make this happen, where we actually built the enforcement system and operated, and where the Ministry of Environment and is scheme owner, and the Agency of Environment are actually the formal authority of low emission zones. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So there was a political wish to sharpen the environment requirements by law for these 4 cities, to also include vans and buses, And the first step we implemented here 1st of July, where it was vehicles older than 2007, and as you can see that it will change over the coming years. So in 2025 it will be vans not older than 2016. There's not been a decision concerning large vehicles yet, but it has been discussed, and we will probably see within the next year or two what the government will do concerning light vehicles. There is a commission right now that look of how we can make Denmark more green. So there's been a change from the fiscal vignette to NPR enforcement. At the time of when the discussion started, Sund & Bælt was actually asked what we could deliver for 1.3 million a year. When we did the calculation, our advantage is that we actually use our core systems that we use for tolling, that we are able to reuse both our systems and a lot of our internal functions as customer service, communication, surveillance, and so on. So we can offer our treasury that we could install 15 camera sites and having 5 mobile units driving around with ANPR camera, and we would be able to do the identification of the vehicle owners and issue the fines and collect the money. More requirements have been added since we started, so I think that the yearly cost right now is more 2.3 million, million euros, but it's still cheap concerning how much we can actually cover. Next slide, please. Just short about how we actually organize the scheme. As I said, the Ministry of Environment is the formal scheme owner, so it has also been a success actually to have a close cooperation between more ministries and more institutions within the Danish state. We have the Agency of Environment that is the formal scheme authority. That means that when we send out a fine, it's the name of the agency that is on the paper. They also handle dispensations and complaints. And then we have the 5 municipalities that actually are the road authorities and the low emission zones owners. But it's still a national scheme. So the requirement is set by the parliament and not by the municipalities. And it's not the municipalities that shall implement the scheme. That is given by Sund & Bælt by law. So the municipalities is responsible for the signs and local information, and have also been involved of where we should put the cameras and where to get the power and so on. But it is actually Sund & Bælt that, as a kind of white label solution, both have built and operate the whole solution. So we are owned by the Ministry of Transport. We operate the scheme, we issue the fines, we handle the payment. The municipalities actually also ask us to establish a common website for the low emission zones, where they just give us information that we could update on the website. So we actually also operate the website on behalf of the municipalities and on behalf of the Agency of Environment. We also have handed direct mails directly to the service users, and we have the customer service where the service users can call before they actually complain, but to get information and require normal inquiries. And of course, we have the KPI reporting from the operation, so that we share with both our owners and the Ministry of and Agency of Environment. I'll mention the two of the main suppliers that or service providers that we use. We use Parktrade in Sweden, that has built our customer service work tool. We also have made a portal where the Agency of Environment can put in dispensations, and as a fine should have a formal decision. That decision is taken by the agency, and that is done in the Parktrade system. It is also Parktrade that look up license plate, both Danish and foreign vehicles, and also there's the service providers for sending out fines and providing a portal where the service users can pay the fines. So actually deliver quite a lot of the infrastructure, and they also do that for Storebælt Link and for our Frederikssund solution. So there we actually have reused a lot. For the roadside and mobile equipment, it is a consortium delivering that. That is ITS Technique, that is a Danish company, and Neology, that is UK based. It has actually been good in these Corona times that all the installation has been done by a Danish supplier, and because Neology has had some problems entering into Denmark, so some training and so on and installation have been of course done remote. But that is the overall organizing of the scheme. Next slide, please. Don't worry, I'll not go into details here, but actually it's just showing the scheme from a more architecture view, where we have Parktrade with the portal, where you can see the Sonnenbelt own systems, where we have Parktrade with the vehicle lists, we have the case management tool, we have the dunning service, we have the landing page, we have Neology and ITS Techniques with the back office and both static and mobile cameras, and we have our own back office system where it's mainly built based on Microsoft Azure, where we actually handle the transactions and do the bookkeeping and have our data warehouse and use Power BI for reporting. And in the top you see our external service providers delivering information about companies, citizens, information or integration to the Ministry of Environment, and also integration to the Danish vehicle register, so we can handle most of the vehicles in the cameras. What we actually do is that we actually take an extract from the Danish vehicle register as a blacklist and put into the camera, so we actually minimize the number of transactions that we should handle in our back office systems. Next slide, please. That is my last slide, and with some statistics and learning so far, because it has been interesting to implement this scheme, and it has not been the implementation of the core system that have been tricky. It has more or less been everything else. So just listing some of the most important part. It's what you think that is in the vehicle register is not always what you can get. So it has been quite a challenging thing to get the right vehicle information. Also to working with a network provider to get a 4G network from the cameras up running. It has also been quite challenging, and getting power to the cameras from the municipalities has been quite challenging. Every time you have to dig, it's you really have to make sure that you're allowed to dig, and but also making sure that the power you actually get is owned by the municipality or not somebody third party. One of the biggest challenges is actually getting the municipalities to get the signs up in time. It has also been taking a lot of time in the spring to get the law passed by Parliament in these COVID-19 times. So the final law was only passed around 3 weeks before we actually went live. And some of the things where we have used a lot of time writing the law was actually how to handle privacy in accordance with GDPR. And then of course it's always difficult to have a common agreement when we have more parties, where we have 5 municipalities. We have the first 3 months from 1st of July to 1st of October, we only send out warnings. So what I've shown here is that 1st of October, so actually only 3 weeks ago, we started to issue fines. And in the first 2 weeks, we have taken 3.5 million pictures and identified 3,000 violations. And not surprisingly, it's primarily vans. So it's actually working very well despite the technical issues. Yes, it was all from my side.
Thanks, Ole. Thank you so much. That's a great run through of your scheme, and congratulations on your progress during the pandemic and go live. One question from me, and then we'll move into our panel discussion as we're bang on time. You mentioned at the very last point that vans seem to be the biggest transgressors of your scheme. Do you have any plans in place to try and address the van issue and turn them into clean vehicle users?
You can say that there have been sent letters in advance to all vans owners about the new scheme, and I know that the interest organization have been a lot of discussions what the owners should do in order to get a cleaner van. And you can say it's not surprisingly that because we have had low emission zones for trucks for I think it's 7 or 8 years. So yeah, they're used to low emission zones. It's new for the van owners. So and that was also the reason why we ended up with only sending out warnings the 3 first months. And I also know that that the Agency of Environment are also giving dispensations for sometimes 3 months or half a year in order for some vans owners to get a cleaner van. So there have been different initiatives to handle this issue.
Joe, that's great. Thanks, Ole. Obviously, we're having discussions with some of our clients in the UK around the difference between professional drivers and the vans, which are essentially non-professional drivers as such, and their different views and opinions on emission zones and clean air zones. So that's really interesting to hear your experience. Right, so it's 11:30 on the dot. Could I invite Nigel and Sam back onto the call, and we have our Q&A session. I would remind participants that you can still post your questions in the question box on the right hand side of your dashboard, and I think Mark sent out a reminder to you. Right, so I'll try and get through as some of these as possible. I'll try and direct them to who I think is best placed to answer them. So I think we'll probably start with you, Sam. We've had a few questions about Leeds in particular, as you can probably imagine, and where they're at, and what are their plans, I suppose, in and around them cancelling, and what could be happening if other areas send their non-compliant buses over there, for example, is something that's come up in question. So is there any more you can tell us about Leeds and where they are at?
Yeah, so I mean, Leeds have presented a case and presented evidence that makes it clear that they are now already in compliance with the legal limits. So that's the first point to make. We wouldn't have changed the position had that not been the case. There is clearly concerns, as there always would be, that circumstances might change. So there is an ongoing review process to make sure that the position stays. Clearly, buses have been a big part of reducing those levels of emissions. We nationally have engaged with the bus sector, as well as it taking place discussions with Transport for, I've forgotten the names. I think of the acronym, I'm trying to remember what the name of it. West Yorkshire, oh, sorry, it's gone.
Combined Authority?
It's WYCA. Yeah, so Combined Authority, that's it, sorry. I don't think someone asked you a question, you can't remember it, but that's right, thank you, Nick. Yeah, the Combined Authority and Leeds City Council obviously having discussions with the local bus services, and have made the point that these benefits are locked in. And for bus companies, of course, you know, if they move buses back into the area, what will happen is a charge will happen, and the vehicles which will be charged are buses. So there is a reasonable argument to be made that won't happen anyway, but we're not relying on that. We are clearly making sure that that's the case. And of course, the schemes which benefit, the retrofits, for instance, have come in, are ties to those local authorities. So I can't make a promise to you, but that is part of the scheme of how things are going to work. So I think, you know, as I say, the position looks rosy. There's been a big fleet change generally in Leeds as well. People have been preparing early. Leeds have put a lot of money in early into their CAZs. They use things like the Early Measures Fund to make those changes, and been quite proactive in their approach. And I think certainly for other local authorities in the same position, that is a lesson can be learned from Leeds, is that taking proactive action, spending money earlier, it will, you know, or can and has had an impact. I think the other thing just to remember with Leeds, it is a different context to some other local authorities as well. Their problem was much less than most local authorities. They've got topographical advantages over some areas, and, you know, sort of weather conditions, all of these things come together. So Leeds is different from, say, Birmingham. It's certainly different from Bath, for instance, and cities which are basically in basins or in valleys. So all these things need remembering. But I certainly wouldn't say, as some people have, you know, Leeds have got away with it. It's not a question of getting away with it. They've done the work, and they've got to the position where they've reduced their exceedance down to nothing. Well, sometimes to legal limits, of course, it's not down to nothing at all. And there still is work to do generally across any clean air zone to bring nitrogen dioxide levels down even further. But as I say, from our perspective, it is that magic concentration limit that they have to get below and show that they can maintain being below that level.
That's great. Thanks for that clarification and additional information. While I've got you on, Sam, we've got a couple of questions about Highways England and what they're doing in regards to the roads that are under their control, and how are they addressing air quality and pollutants?
Yeah, and that's, clearly is a really good question because the strategic road networks in a number of areas do come into the areas which which we're looking at the issues, and they do have some significant, really significant issues on those roads. And you might have seen in the Times, for instance, that one of the things that they've done recently is to introduce smart motorways and reducing traffic limits, which appears to have shown some reductions in NO2. Which is, is obviously a good thing, but I mean that's not a solution that's going to solve every single problem by any stretch of imagination. But traffic management does have a part to play in these issues. So I think that's probably one of the things which certainly would help. The government is pressing Highways England, I think it would be fair to say, to ensure that they do comply and make every effort. But even with modelling, some of these links, I think it is fair to say there are some very, very significant challenges which are going to need to be addressed. They've certainly made some efforts as well in terms of trying to increase the availability of charge points. I think the investment, something like £15 million investment to put charge points every 20 miles on 95% of the strategic road network, which will definitely help. There's also issues around other experiments I know they've been doing on green barriers. I think that's happened in Sheffield. And also, of course, they have an air quality responsibility of their own, which they're developing plans, as are other, just as local authorities are. And they are also working, excuse me, with local authorities. Again, things like Leeds City Council's the Electric Van Centre of Excellence. That's something which they've been a partner in to try and help take the uptake of electric vans, as already said, white vans are an issue, something else that does need to be addressed. I don't think there's any single answer to the Highways England question. I could talk about a number of different things, but I think the real point is that there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and it is something that they are getting on with. I can't really talk for their own efforts, but I think it is fair to say there is a considerable amount of work which is being undertaken to try and address some of these issues.
That's great. Thanks, Sam. You again mentioned our focus is on NOx's, and I suppose a question for Nigel: what are we doing as an industry, as professionals, as local authorities around sort of PM 2.5 and microparticles in particular?
It's an interesting question, actually, because it's evolving. Science, the evidence is evolving, I should say, and it's showing that in fact we're probably going to find that ultrafines and PM 2.5 is going to be more of an issue in the near future than it will be for other gaseous pollutants that are produced by road vehicles, so out of the tailpipe. So as we find we're getting major reductions in gases, we may find that the proportion of ultrafines is going up, and it's a challenge, because I think with the introduction of clean air zones and the type of low emission zones or restrictions that could be in play in urban environments, there should be a benefit to reductions in PM if the volumes of vehicles go down, because the main source really is brake wear and tyre wear, and is regenerated and resuspended into the air. So that's a major issue at local sites. It's a challenge to see what can be done, and I think the obvious one is, the less vehicles that are running on tyres and brakes, then we should see improvements in it. And in theory, when you've got electric vehicles, for example, they're using engine braking rather than foot braking to regenerate sort of power into the batteries as well. So there could be some benefits, but then you could weigh. There's also research that looks at the fact that we're going to have heavier vehicles because there's batteries. So the braking might be a little bit more. So it's a very difficult balance, I think, to get right. So it is a concern, but in theory, if the volumes of vehicles are going down and there's a modal shift going forwards, we're moving towards sort of cleaner sourced vehicles, then it will become a bigger proportion, but of what the source of pollutions are. But it's, in theory, is going to go down slightly. But it's a concern. I think that's the next big one, along with ammonia.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. If I just point,
Yeah.
I totally agree with Nigel on that. I mean, particulate matter is the next big one, and again, the pressure will be increasing on that because the Environment Bill sets out some, I think, quite ambitious targets on particulate matter, which is something, again, I think certainly your audience will want to be keeping an eye on what's going on there. But yeah, I totally agree with Nigel. That's the next one. That's one which will be presenting the new challenges once we've got nitrogen dioxide out of the way.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Nigel and Sam. So, Ole, question for you. Public acceptance of these schemes is obviously key in delivering them and getting them on the ground. How have you responded to challenges from the public, if you've had any, in fact, about the displacement of emissions once these zones go in? Ole?
Yeah, I lost you at the end. The sound disappeared.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll ask again. Public acceptance we're talking about, and we've had a few questions on challenges from the public in terms of displacement of emissions. How have you gone about your public engagement in around the launch of your scheme and addressed some of the possible displacement issues that may have come up?
You can say we do the operations. We are not policymakers, but I can of course see what have been discussed via the press, because of course there have been a discussion about how that the vans could be ready and pressure at the minister in order to give dispensations and so on. And as I said before, that there have been dispensations for 3 or 6 months in order to that some vans owners have the time to replace the vehicles. But of course there have been a lot of discussions, but I think that the general opinion is that of course the city has to be cleaner and we have to do something.
Okay, thanks. And on the matter of displacement, Nigel and Sam, how have some of the UK CAZs addressed the concerns raised that the ring roads, let's say, will just take heavier traffic and larger vehicles bypassing the schemes? Is there anything that we can learn from the approaches that have been taken from existing studies?
I'll start, and Sam can.
Nigel,
some of the research in some locations that we've done, clean air zones, has shown that there are some co-benefits because of the introduction of a clean air zone where we're looking at introduction of low emission vehicles. So if they have to enter an area which requires certain standards for, say, Euro 6 or Euro 4, if there's going to be a number of vehicles actually entering that zone, then they have to pass through from other areas. So in theory, there should be an improvement in the air quality outside of the zones as well. So we're seeing some co-benefits from for air quality in locations that are outside the boundaries as well as inside the boundaries. So that seems to be coming through, and I think that is probably showing up. And in theory, it should improve backgrounds across the board locally as well. So Sam, you probably got more evidence or some examples.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the clear things that is set out in the Clean Air Zone framework is that displacement has to be considered as part of any plan or study where there is exceedances of NO2, because clearly there's no point in taking action if all you're going to do is move its 3 roads to the left. So as part of any plan on it, that local authorities have to model against where traffic may be displaced to, and whether that will create a new problem in those areas. So I think where you have clean air zones in place, then that displacement is considered. I think where you're looking at situations where you cross boundaries on local authorities, there is interaction with those local authorities in the development of the plans as well. But yeah, it's clearly a concern. But I think you're right, Nigel. I mean, one of the things we are seeing across the board is the fleet mix is improving. The cleanliness of fleet mix is improving, and that will ultimately will have the benefit of reducing the emissions in any sort of area. But should really sort of address these sorts of issues about displacement.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Nigel. That's great. And we'll stay with you, Nigel, for the next one, hydrogen, and in particular hydrogen buses, and how we've had a couple of questions on skeptical questions, shall I say, on their proven environmental credentials, shall we say, compared to electric buses. So can you talk us through what's available for bus operators to meet these emission standards in these zones?
Well, I've got an example of the work that Brighton Buses are doing, and there's certainly Patrick Warner of Brighton Buses is probably the person to talk to, and he's very enthusiastic about it. And the project that they're working on is actually culminated in, I think, the first hydrogen buses to be up in Aberdeen. I'll probably be corrected on that one, but I think they've now got some hydrogen buses up there and in their fleet. And the work at the moment is showing that, yes, it is expensive to actually get hydrogen to sites, and I believe that the only viable option is to sort of be able to generate it from sustainable sources, so that they can generate offshore power to actually create the hydrogen and then transport it to locations at the moment. But I'm sure there are bigger plans for a lot of bus operators. So so yes, it's expensive, and obviously the buses are a lot more expensive than electric. But the thought going forward is that hydrogen is a good option for buses and long haul trucks. And LVCP, sort of the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, have actually sort of done some research and shown that hydrogen is probably the trajectory that long haul HGVs is going to be going in the future. So the market is probably going to expand from buses into HGVs in the future. So it's expensive now. That is definitely, but I think as we're progressing towards moving away from ICE, then we're going to have that as a serious option for operators. I hope that covers the points.
I think so. Thanks for that, Nigel. Thank you very much. Ole, we've had a question about this Euro scheme and the income from the fines in particular, and where that funding goes. Does it go to the ministry, or does it go down to the individual municipalities? And is that income ring fenced for investment back into transport and environment projects locally?
It could have been good if it was that, but the problem with fines in Denmark is that that all goes back to the big bowl. So it goes to inland revenue. So there's an income for the state. So it is actually not possible in Denmark to send it back.
Okay, that's answered that question. Thanks for that. We've had surprisingly, actually, a few questions on workplace levy, which we were hoping to host a workplace levy webinar similar to this in the near future, and a face-to-face conference in the early next year on workplace levies and clean air zones. So we may as well pick these up. One question in particular was interesting, that has literally just come in on workplace levy, is around is it a quick win, a quick fix if CAZs are delayed any further because of various actions as such from the environment, from other things. I myself, I've worked on a number of workplace levy schemes, and I think it would be quite a challenge for a local authority or politicians to promote a scheme that charges in particular businesses in this current climate, when businesses are struggling with the lockdown rules and everything that's going on. So I just wondered, from Nigel and Sam's perspective, that their sort of views on how complementary a workplace levy type scheme is to a clean air plan for a local authority.
I suppose I'll take it. My turn, I suppose, Nigel, isn't it? But because I can be short and sweet on this one. But I think we've seen with Nottingham that workplace levies were introduced there, that it was part of the plan, and I think, you know, it clearly seems to have had the desired impact in keeping NO2 levels down. I don't think it's necessarily an alternative, but I do think there's potential certainly for it to be complementary. And you know, one of the measures that local authorities could consider when putting together a nitrogen dioxide plan. I don't know enough about it to be able to give any sort of scientific evidence thing, but we do, you know, it has clearly worked somewhere as part of a mix of various different measures to reduce NO2. So I think certainly something, depending on the city, that could be considered.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think it's I think Nottingham have had a lot of experience, and they've sort of had their workplace levy in place for a number of years, and so I think getting it through the political system is an interesting challenge. But you're right. I think it's something that could be considered, and you know, it could be introduced at a smaller scale. But I think the challenge at the moment is obviously COVID has had a huge impact on businesses. So I think a lot of authorities will probably shy away from that sort of thing. One thing I did suggest in there was like sort of planning guidance, and you might say that within the planning guidance there are sort of levels of electric vehicle charging requirements that are being introduced by local authorities, and so you know, planning guidance is a way of actually bringing workplace levies into play a little bit by sort of like encouraging those new developments, commercial or business or residential, to think about moving towards low emission vehicles or zero emission vehicles in the parking that they're actually going to be introducing. So in a way, that is sort of a type of workplace levy in a way, but obviously not at the scale.
That's great, and yeah, I would absolutely tend to agree. Last couple of questions as we're running out of time. Bristol, Sam has come up with a couple of questions as to where are Bristol at with their plans. Do you have any update for us that you can share?
Well, Bristol have launched their consultation and basically, I can tell you what the actually is. I was just trying to look it up because I have it written down somewhere. I can't, unfortunately, don't keep it all in my brain at exactly the same time. So just give me 1 second. But yeah, I mean, they've launched their consultation, and obviously we will look forward to seeing their measures. I mean, I think it's fair to say that their green transport measures are actually quite ambitious. and I think really we're just waiting to see what they come back to us with once their consultation's been taken place, and then of course their proposals onto whether to implement a Class C or D CAZ. I don't think there's much more I can really say on it, but I think as with all local authorities, we are pushing for results as quickly as possible, and I think I'm trying to remember what date their case is due in, but I think it is due in towards the end of this year. So I think it's probably a watch this space sort of situation at the moment. But I'd certainly urge people to read the consultation. As with all consultations, it does have an impact on non-local authority members of the audience, and also for local authorities, shows what other people are doing, and whether there's ideas that could be taken through.
That's fabulous. Thanks. I'm sure we'll all have a look at Bristol's consultation. Probably final question now, as we're getting close to midday, and we've had a few in on monitoring, and in particular monitoring air quality. Obviously, we as a group are probably well aware of the different ways in which this can be done. So first question for all of you in order. Ole, to start with, what sort of monitoring regime do you have to support and complement your scheme across both inside the zones and outside the zones? Again, probably on the point of displacement again.
I'll not be able to answer that.
Okay, no problems. Well, we'll try and get those answers to who posed those from colleagues, from Ole's colleagues. But Nigel, what are your views on the importance of monitoring, both before schemes go in, during, after, inside, around zones?
Yeah, I think it's always important to have a baseline, and I think this is interesting because in locations where we've got hotspots, where local authorities have got AQMAs, they've identified it through the sort of the LAQM process, the annual review and assessments. So they can see what's happening, and so as soon as you can implement a clean air zone or a low emission zone, it's very important to continue to identify those locations where it exceeds. But the other thing is, as we've talked about, is that with people who have concerns of deflection, we also need to look at other locations around the clean air zone or low emission zone. So, roadside monitoring as well as background monitoring. In some cases up to now, we haven't seen the reduction in background as we expected. So it's important to see what's happening in the background, because there will be a contribution generally if all these clean air zones go forward, but we also have to consider that at the moment we're seeing a bit of a flat line. We're not seeing it actually improving the air quality completely across the board. So background monitoring as well as roadside monitoring is very important.
Okay, thanks. And Sam, do you have your view on monitoring to finish up?
Oh yes, we are very definitely monitoring. So the UK air quality monitors, there's a network across the UK which we continue to manage through the Environment Agency and with Ricardo, and these are what are basically the national baselines that we use in order to keep an eye on the NO2 plans. Whilst obviously there's also a local authority network, we tend on the whole to default to local authority monitoring stations because they're targeted in specific areas. But in all cases, the plans are formulated based on what monitoring has gone on before. As plans come into place, be it charging or non-charging, we continue to monitor that, and post compliance we will continue to monitor. So we're under legal obligation to do so, and anyway under the Air Quality Directive, which has been transposed into UK law. So monitoring is essential and it will continue. And it's not just, of course, NO2, we also monitor a range of other pollutants, including ozone, particulate matter, and ammonia. So it isn't simply a question of any one noxious gas being monitored. It's a number of them.
That's great, super. Thank you all, and that brings us to 12 o'clock. So the end of our webinar today. It just leaves me to say thank you to our presenters today, to Ole, to Nigel, to Sam. Thank you to Landor for hosting today's event. Thank you for the participants who took part and sent the questions in. We didn't manage to get through all the questions, so those that we didn't answer, I will share around the expert presenters, and we will get you an answer to those as soon as we can. The video of this webinar will be published soon, and I would advise everyone to keep their eye out for our next events, which are likely to be a workplace levy webinar and hopefully an actual face-to-face live event in March next year on both clean air zones and workplace levy. So thank you everyone for taking part, and I will see you all next time.
Yeah.